First of all, you'll know that the heart of my work is something I call potentialism. I suggest with potentialism that we have a duty to realize our potential while helping others realize theirs. And we do this obviously through relationships, and the SDI is fantastic at helping us with relationships. We do this with relationships at work, at home, and also in our communities. Something else that we know that's always worth reminding ourselves is that the better our relationships, the more we can realize our potential and enjoy harmony. But if we have bad relationships, we're going to fall short of realizing our potential, and we're going to suffer a lot of disharmony. And certainly the problems that you hear in relationships during this pandemic are endemic of this exact problem of relationships. Our knowledge of relationships comes from what we experience at home, the people that we've met along the way, and whether or not we spend any time studying the topic. And we can improve our relationships by learning why people act the way they do and why they say the things that they do. And then by learning how to adjust what we say and what we do in order to better relate to them. So the SDI is quite useful for this. It reminds us and it teaches us about the motives, the behaviors, and conflict. Three things that if you know more about, you're going to significantly increase your chance of realizing your potential, and you'll enjoy greater interpersonal harmony. So there's 20 important things that I think you need to know that come out of my work with the SDI. And very quickly, here's what they are. Number one, our behaviors are driven by motives. We have three primary motives, and we thank Eric Fromm and Elias Porter for bringing these forward. Some of us are primarily motivated by helping people. Some of us want to achieve performance, and some want to figure out the process. I like to use the R's instead of the P's, so I call it relationships, results, and rationale. And we're a mixture of all three. So here's another slide on that. The SDI measures our motives through a questionnaire, and then it throws it up to us online. And here's my results. You can see that I'm mostly process-oriented, or green. My second highest score is performance, or red. And my lowest score when things are going well is blue, focused on people. The SDI gives your results on a triangle. There are 7 areas. You can be all red, all green, all blue, or you can be a mixture of 2 of those colors, or you can be a mixture of all 3 in the middle, which we call the hub. The second thing that we need to know is that your color, your motive, can trigger conflict in another person that has another color. For example, if somebody is very results-oriented, they may trigger conflict in somebody who's more blue, people-oriented. That's natural. You can just think about that at work. Third thing that is important to know is that people don't see our motives, they see our behaviors. But our behaviors, or as the SDI calls them, their strengths. Our strengths are like the buoy that you'd see on the top of the water, but the buoy itself is anchored by our motives. And if you want to be better at understanding relationships, you need to understand both the strengths or behaviors as well as the motives of the people that you're dealing with. The SDI has also reminded us that we use some behaviors more often than others, and they show these on a pyramid. They, with the questionnaire, they measure 28 specific behaviors, and then they, through your self-assessment, they'll identify which ones you use most often and which ones you use least often, and they put them on this pyramid. I call it a pyramid. The most common are on top, the least common are on the bottom. Most common you may use because you like them, you think that they work well. The ones in the middle you might use sometimes, and the ones at the bottom you typically will avoid because they make you uncomfortable. The ones you see here are not mine, they're picked up from another, just to show you the shape of the pyramid. Fifth most important thing we know from the SDI is if you overdo a behavior or a strength, you're going to create some conflict, right? And you can overdo it either by doing it too much or too often or both. So for example, if you're too methodical, you can be considered rigid. And you can be too methodical too often. You can be simply too methodical, or you can be too methodical too often. That creates conflict. So the SDI also measures this. And therefore, it can easily identify the conflict triggers that are causing you problems in your relationships. The sixth most important thing is just this concept of overdone strengths. Elias Porter suggests that we don't have weaknesses. Nobody has weaknesses. We have strengths, and we have overdone strengths. In other words, we have behaviors that we use, and then we have behaviors that we use too often. Here are mine. My top three strengths: cautious, ambitious, and adaptable. But I overdo sometimes cautious, which means I become suspicious, which is absolutely true. I also tend to overdo fair, which can be perceived as cold. If I want to be fair, but I'm being too fair, it might seem that I'm being cold for some people or cold on some ideas, in the idea that I don't want to give all of my interest to one without considering the others. And adaptable appears on both sides, but if you're too adaptable, you're compliant, and that can be also perceived as a problem by people who are trying to figure out where do you stand. And again, just like our strengths, our overdone strengths are also put on this pyramid like the SDI did with the regular strengths. So overdone strengths and regular strengths have showing which are most often used, which are least often used. Number 7, our motives change predictably when we move into conflict, and we call this our conflict sequence. This bit of information is something I haven't found in any other assessment, where the other assessments might give you some read on your motives or your personality. The SDI is the only one that I've found that gives you a read on how you change as conflict escalates. And here's my results. In stage 1, I move into a deeper green. Then I move to red as problems escalate. And finally, I turn blue. I'll explain more about that. This is shown on the SDI triangle as an arrow. And it's also another concept, number 8 concept, is that as we move into conflict, our focus narrows. At first, when things are going well, we're worried about ourselves, the problem, and the other person. And a typical day at work is stage 1. A bad day at work, I would call stage 2. That's when you're interested in yourself and you want to solve the problem, but the other people have become the problem for you. So you don't care much about them. You might even dislike them, but you're still focused on trying to solve the problem. A really bad day, and that doesn't happen very often, but you can all think about the few times it's happened, is stage 3, the end of your rope, if you wish, those worst times. And you'll, whatever you do, you'll be looking after protecting yourself. In other words, you don't care about the problem anymore. Whatever you do, it's look after yourself. And the pandemic is causing pretty much everybody around the world to be in stage 2. In other words, if they get upset, that's where you start to notice they're doing crazy things. They don't care about me. They only care about themselves. And you could draw some analogies to the whole debate in politics, the whole debate about the mask, no mask, open, closed businesses. What you're seeing there is the playing out of stages of conflict. Number 9, most important thing to know is that our conflict sequence, something that's pretty much set in stone by the time we're about 18, 15, 16, 17, 18, can create conflict in others' people. So in this example, I've added the colors from stage 0 to stage 3. And let's just take Anil and Karsten for a moment. Anil's blue, when things are going well, stage 0. He stays blue when he faces conflict. So he's a very nice guy. Stage 2, he starts to become more analytical and maybe ask more questions. And only when he moves to stage 3 does he become red, results oriented. And you would think, wow, Anil, that's not his style at all. He's normally a nice guy. But if you look at Karsten at the other end, Karsten's red, red, green, blue. So in other words, he's very results oriented. He might be nice the way when he's doing it, but he's push, 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 get it done. As he moves into conflict, he keeps pushing. And then he turns green. So he would ask questions, why aren't people actually achieving these results? And only at the end does he become nice and blue. In other words, it's the opposite of Anil. So if Carson behaves the way he thinks is normal to behave, he's going to be very red, and he's going to cause Anil to think he's not a nice guy. Whereas Anil, if he behaves in his natural blue way, Carson's going to think Anil's not getting anything done. He's just being nice. So the conflict sequence that's natural to you is also going to cause conflict in other people. Being aware of that is very important. This slide shows you how I come up with stage 0. The results are on your SDI. You can come back to that one. 10th most important point, to compare and discuss your motives with your partner so that you better understand and relate to each other. And that's especially true if you're from different parts of the triangle. So you can use the software. It has a very nifty compare function. If you ask them if they want to compare, they have to accept. And once they accept, then two people can compare. So Victoria and Amy, for example, they can compare their details with each other. Number 11, you can also compare and discuss your conflict sequence with your partner. And that'll help you understand each other's motives and vice versa, and you'll relate to each other more effectively. So Anil and Karsten can share their conflict sequence and have that discussion about how their different way of approaching conflict at work is creating unwarranted conflict between them. In other words, it's unwarranted because they might agree on the same thing that they're doing, they're just approaching it in a very different way. Here's another picture of how you can compare. This is Maddie, my wife, and I, and you can see that Maddie's more blue, I'm more green, so that can create some issues for us. You can also compare which behaviors you choose and which behaviors they choose, and have that discussion. Point number 13, you can compare and discuss the reasons that you choose the behaviors that you choose. And this is interesting. On the slide, you can see that 4 different people might choose to be forceful, but for 4 different reasons. In other words, forceful, which is typically a red behavior, may be chosen by someone who's primarily red performance oriented in order to overcome obstacles. But if they're more green like I am, I might choose forceful because I want to clarify my point. Or somebody who's more blue may choose to be forceful because they're trying to protect other people. They're doing it, in other words, for a blue motive, even though it's a red behavior. So understanding the reasons that you and your partner use or avoid certain behaviors is very important conversation if you want to improve your relationship with your partners. Number 14, you can also use the SDI to learn how to communicate better, or as I call it, speak their dialect, so that you can better relate with your partner. And as you can see on the slide, it gives you tips on what to do in meetings. So if I was needing to relate better with Maddie, my wife, it gives me tips on what to do in meetings, what messages, how I would phrase them, how I would phrase things in conversations, and also style and things to avoid. And basically, because Maddie is red-blue and I'm more green, I would need to learn to speak a red-blue dialect. In other words, a result-oriented conversation that is very respectful of the people, and not green, which would be more detail-oriented, right? Without explicit regard to the results or the people. Here's some notes on speak their dialect, which I put together over the years with my experience, also available for you to read in greater detail after this. Number 15, point number 15, relating to teams, you can see how your team members' motives compare to everybody else on the team. And that's important because people who sit off in the red, blue, or green quadrant want to understand how do they compare to people who are blends of two colors, or like number 11, sitting right in the hub as a mixture of all three colors. That's a useful conversation. And again, you can use the SDI tool online to compare with anybody in the team. You can create a team and then click compare with everybody in your team. Very useful. Again, they have to accept that they want to share their results with you, but most teams, everybody wants to share because they want the team to become more effective, more able to realize their potential and have greater harmony. Well, that's what we want at work, right? Achieve results. Number 16 is to also look at how do your teammates change in conflict. So here's the individual respondents' arrows on the triangle. So that this shows how they change when they move into conflict. Another way to do it would be how I showed you earlier. But this is also very useful because it helps you figure out as a team, are we reacting in stressful situations in ways that help us or hinder us? For example, if you look at stage 0 and stage 1, for this team, you'll see they're primarily blue and green, which might be great if what's needed is thoughtful, friendly work. But if what's needed is actually a focus on performance and results, you're probably going to struggle to see that at stage 0 and stage 1. And like one of the clients I had in China, they were very blue-green. They did very thoughtful, friendly, award-winning work, but the client, who was primarily red, was very frustrated about how slow it was going and how they weren't getting all the performance results and KPIs on time. And that got them upset. And actually, as the client got upset, so did this team get upset. And that's when they became very red and very blue. But notice at stage 3, you don't see much green. In other words, the more the client pushed them to high stage of conflict, the more this team, and it was an interior design team, ended up moving away from their thoughtful designs and causing themselves longer term issues because under stress in stage 3, as a team, they needed more green behavior. So it's a way that you can use the SDI to analyze your team effectiveness. Number 17, you can actually use this tool. This is unique online because of the way the online tool now works. You can see which behaviors actually trigger conflict. For example, Victoria and Vince, in this example, use forceful behaviors a lot. That's comes right up at the top of the triangle in level 2. But at the other end, Amy and David never use forceful. It's right at the bottom of their pyramid. In other words, every time Victoria and Vince start to be forceful, they're going to end up triggering conflict with Amy and David. Now, what's interesting is you know that, and we know that, and they know that. But this tool gives you a way to discuss that issue and then enables Amy and David to decide whether that's okay, and Victoria and Vince to decide whether they could be a little less forceful or a little bit more blue and green at the same time. And notice Amy, David are blue on the right, Victoria, Vince are red or red-green on the left. So this is a normal behavior for them. We can also look at the overdone behaviors. I gave the example earlier of being too methodical. If I'm too methodical, I become rigid. So when Kent, Mark, and Victoria become too methodical, they become rigid. This is one of their highest overdone strengths. And for David Bailey at the other end, that's going to cause him to get very upset. That's going to trigger conflict, not just for him, but for Ella and Vince as well. In other words, they're being too green. And you can see David is blue. That blue line under his name, that reminds you that he is blue in his motives. Here's another way that the tool shows that to you. It actually allows you to flag the people and see which are the most overdone and least overdone strengths and who they affect. And you can do that by behavior, which is very useful for your group or your team. Here's another way of looking at it. In this case, they looked at suspicious or cautious and found out who the problems were for. And yet again, another way to look at it, which are the most and least overdone strengths. And you can see here, the red category has 13 most overdone strengths. And that's probably for this team where you're going to find your problems. So it allows you as the team leader to zero in on where are the problems and then drive deeper and figure out which behaviors between which people are causing the issues. Or we can do that for you. So based on the SDI results that you've seen, we can help improve your relationships with other people, and we can help improve relationships inside your team. As a result of improving relationships, we're going to help you improve your potential, your results, and the harmony.
And point number 20 is important and kind of a bonus because the SDI can also help flag your leadership skills. I also use it for negotiation and how to teach influencing, etc. But in particular on this point, your conflict sequence also highlights what I call your blind spot. It's the last of the three colors to appear in your sequence is the set of behaviors that's most likely to cause trouble in your relationships and in your career. So beware. So for example, on this slide, you can see that I'm typically green when things are going well, green, red when things are going well. My first stage is green, my second stage is red, and my last stage is blue. In other words, blue is the last of the three colors to appear in my sequence. And I have learned over the course of my career that problems relate to the fact that I don't recognize the importance of the people. I've learned that, I've studied that, I've worked very hard at improving that. But, you know, when things go wrong, I would typically rather strangle somebody than hug them. And that's just the way I am. And so I have to recognize that. That's my blind spot. For you, it may be green. It may be that you don't focus on the details when you need to. Or it may be red, that although you're very nice and thoughtful, you're not getting the stuff done, and that's causing conflict for the people around you. So we all have a blind spot, and the importance is to figure out what is that for you. So contact us. We'd like to help. We have integrated the SDI 2.0 into all of our training modules. You'll see it in terms of understanding the issues, dialogue and dialect with different types of people, conflict resolution, how to sell your ideas and services to others, how to negotiate and reach agreement, use tactics and the link between red, green, blue, and aspirations and negotiation. Also, your actual role as a leader, finding the way and leading the way, is also influenced by your motives. This is an interesting slide that shows you how all of this connects together. And the last three slides, if you're interested, you can just download. These are the 20 points that I have highlighted. So thank you for listening. Good luck. Contact us if you'd like to know how to do things better. We're here to help. We want to work with you to make your relationships more successful at work, at home, and in your communities.